The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Well, I appreciate the underlying amendment that we're discussing here right now. Let me just point out that the Republicans have submitted a substitute to address this overall issue. Republicans, however, have done so in a targeted approach, addressing actual problems, and it's really the more sensible approach to the whole derivative reform issue. You know, the centerpiece of the Republican alternative is something also found in the chairman's bill, which is a trade repository, where all o.T.C. trades would be required to be reported to. The repository then will provide valuable transparency, something that we're all trying to achieve, to the entire o.T.C. marketplace, and will give the regulators the ability to analyze the appropriate data for their purposes, as well as provide aggregated data to the broader marketplace. Well, we don't set up a Byzantine regulatory regime over the many market participants, and we don't do that because we don't presume, without any relevant supporting data, that these entities needed to be micromanaged in this manner. We do require that the regulators to review the data and regulatory report back to Congress if an entity has not already regulated by a prudential regulator, whether they should be more heavily regulated due to its size or its scope or its activities in the o.T.C. marketplace. So the Republican substitute does not have a broad requirements for mandatory clearing, but it does codify the commitments that the private sector has already made. And they've done so working responsibly and cooperatively with the appropriate regulators. And they do so to engage in ever more and greater amounts of central clearing now and into the future as well. But you know, when you think about it, these changes all take time, and they need to be done in a responsible manner. If we were going to force central clearing through some sort of central counterparties and having adequate counterparties for risk they are unfamiliar with and could exacerbate the systemic risk. So central clearing should be opened up over time to as many participants as possible, again in a responsible manner, so as not to do more harm than good, which I think is what we're all trying to achieve at the end of the day with the amendments and otherwise. We also require margin requirements between dealers and major market participants, and that would address a major issue with the a.I.G. related problems that I discussed earlier. In regards to the capital requirements, you know, prudential regulators, look at them for a moment. Prudential regulators are really required by our substitute to take the swap activities of supervised entities into account when setting capital requirements for those entities. Let me step back for a minute and just say that again. What you're basically saying here in the a.I.G. situation is what we should have had occur there is the prudential regulators should have been looking at those swap requirements when they set the capital requirements over at a.I.G. or other like situations. But again, it is not appropriate to set these bank-like capital requirements on non-financial entities. So our Republican substitute would not do so. Finally, we generally agree with the overall chairman's regard to segregating, and I yield myself in one more or 30 more seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
Finally, we agree with the chairman in regards to segregating margin for o.T.C. swaps, although we exempt various margining for segregation requirements based on input from both the buy and the sell side. See, margin should be treated as such, especially if a dealer's counterparty wishes it to be so, and should not be commingled with the dealer's funds. Many of the problems associated with the Lehman bankruptcy, we're told, and I understand, are related to this very issue. And so requiring, and I'll close on this, requiring margin segregation, we believe, would be an appropriate response to that issue and that problem and would solve it for the future.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Does the gentleman wish to?
I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm now pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Beam.
The gentlewoman from Illinois is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I want to thank the Chairman Frank and Peterson of both committees and the committees for their diligent efforts on derivatives reform and appreciate the conciliatory and open nature in which we've worked on this piece of legislation. I have the honor to serve as the Vice Chair of the New Dem Coalition and Co-Chair of the New Dem Financial Services Task Force, and derivatives reform is an area where New Dems have worked diligently